I have some
Is
notes.
my mic good?
Okay.
Your
With
your mic's good. Your face is not.
All right, that's fine.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters.
No time like the present, Jake.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Gold Eagle Jake, live from Gold Eagle.
And today we're kicking off our series on the big 6 distilleries in Kentucky. And obviously we have to start with the big one, Buffalo Trace. So
Can't tell from the shirt that either you or I are wearing in the video.
Ooh, nice.
Except
I'm
for
the
they
only
screwed
one
up on
not
mine and
repping.
it forgot the S at the end. It just says Weller. It's missing the S. I
Yeah.
have to take it back and see if they can sew the S on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think everybody, knows what Buffalo Trace is. They've heard of it. I think everyone's pretty well aware of the lineup. We want to talk a little bit about the history and then some of the kind of signature notes of their whiskey and that kind of stuff. So Dan, you have a couple notes prepared, right? Let's go ahead and just jump in.
We're letting Dan start with his notes.
Hate both of you guys. Happy Thanksgiving. So it's obviously the biggest. It's also the oldest continually operated distillery in the States. So, I mean, it's one of the few that made it through Prohibition as making medicinal whiskey, which is just whiskey that you can wink, wink and say it's helping you feel better. It goes back to the first distillery that was kind of operated. I mean, there's been buyouts and things along the way. But basically what's considered the first Buffalo Trace distillery, even though it wasn't called Buffalo Trace for a long time, was built in 1811. And it's basically been producing whiskey since 1811. It's got, like Jake's shirt that you're wearing, it's got a lot of names on it. A lot of the product lines that come out are named after some of the really big historical figures that go back in history for Buffalo Trace. It was first constructed in 1811. In 1870, it had its first buyout, and it was bought out by a guy by the name of E.H. Taylor, which you might have heard of before. Makes great whiskey, probably one of the best ones in Jake's blind tastings. Continual winner of E.H. Taylor. But once he bought it in 1870, he had registered the name of the OFC distillery, which is the Old Fire Copper distillery. He had it there for about 9 years till he started running into money troubles, and then sold it to Stagg in 1879. Like really old stuff here. 1885, Warehouse C was built, and that's kind of one of the big staples that you see when you go down to Buffalo Trace. They have a few of their original rick houses still standing. Warehouse C was also the one that was hit by a tornado not that long ago, or a while ago, I guess by now.
10 years ago, maybe?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Probably even longer than, I thought it was, yeah.
Oh, maybe, yeah,
it
could
while.
even be longer.
But not only was Warehouse C one of the oldest brick houses there, but in 1886, Stagg installed steam piping in it to make it one of the first climate-controlled brick houses in the States. So once we hit Prohibition, it made it through by selling medicinal whiskey, made it through the downfall of whiskey in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And one of the reasons whiskey started getting popular again was at the time Elmer T. Lee decided to market out Blanton's Single Barrel, which is really the first single barrel whiskey to hit the market, which started to create a new buzz around whiskey. Obviously, since then, they've now named a whiskey line after Elmer T. Lee. Lots of things going on, not a ton. I don't want to spend a ton of time on their history because it'd take forever. But 1992 was kind of a big day because that's when Sazerac bought out the distillery. And then in 1999 is when they renamed it to Buffalo Trace and started producing the Buffalo Trace line. Along the way since then, also in 1999, Sazerac purchased out the Weller brand. As Stitzel Weller was starting to struggle financially, so Buffalo Trace bought out Weller. Kevin Hill bought out Old Fitz. And then 02, Sazerac purchased the Pappy Van Winkle name and started working with the Van Winkles on creating whiskey at the Buffalo Trace Distillery as well, too. I mean, it would take forever to go through a distillery that's been basically producing whiskey since 1811. I mean, they've produced millions and millions of barrels. They actually have a rick house just to hold their millionth barrels of whatever millionth barrel they're on at the current time. And to this day, they're now producing 2.65 million gallons of whiskey a year out of the Buffalo Trace Distillery, which is a little bit more than we do at Whiskey Acres. Kind of the thing we talk about is they produce more in a day than we'll probably produce in our lifetime as a distillery.
Jeez, that's crazy to think about. I thought you were going to say like more than a year, but more than a lifetime probably.
We're going to increase production possibly, and we'd be going from like 400 barrels a year to 500 barrels a year.
Yeah.
They have 60,000 gallon stills that they're operating right now. So.
Yeah, so speaking of those stills, I remember when I first went to Buffalo Trace about 5 years ago, they had one 60-gallon still, and they were only running it like 12 hours a day. And then last time I was there, they talked about how now they have two stills, and they're running both of them 24/7. They went from like, I mean, I don't know these numbers right off the top of my head, but I know they went from like 20 rick houses to like 60 or 80 within the matter of like 2 years. They were just building and building and building and buying property around, and just filling barrels. Like crazy.
In the last 10 years, they've bought like 400 acres of property just to build rick houses on.
Yeah. I mean,
and that's probably that might not even keep up with their production.
No.
Yeah. And this, like, I just wanted to focus on this stuff I mean, they do some things for some other distilleries, but I just wanted to keep everything focused around the exact stuff that Buffalo Trace does. Besides their history, they're, like we've talked about it recently, they only have a few mash bills. And when you look at their product line, they have Mash Bill 1, which is what Eagle Rare, Old Charter, both your Stags, your George T. Stag and your Stag come out of. Your Taylors, your Buffalo Trace, and your Benchmark all come out of Mash Bill 1. Mash Bill 2 is going to be Ancient Age, Hancock's President Reserve, Blanton's, Elmer, and Rock Hill, which I have my Mash Bill 2 barrel, but I hold all my Buffalo Trace stuff in. The only product of the Mash Bill 2 line I don't have is Rock Hill Farms. So wink, wink, Jake, if you get one in. Just to throw that one out there. the one that that's
the one that has a store behind him.
Yeah.
Actually, we both do
the
today.
One that has a store behind him, the one that has a store behind him. They have their weeded mash bill, which is where your Wellers and your Pappies come from. The Pappies work directly with Buffalo Trace on their own line, though. Then you have the rye mash bill, which is your Sazeracs, your Saz 18, your Thomas H. Handy, and the Van Winkle rye comes out of the rye mash bill as well. So those are the main mash bills. The big thing that the big hype they get every year is for the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection, which is a collection of normally 5 different bottles, except for 2 years ago they didn't like the Stag Senior, so they didn't include it in the BTAC. But if you hear whiskey people talking about BTAC and you don't know what it is, it's just the Buffalo Trace Antique. And the 5 bottles in that are Sazerac 18, Thomas H. Handy, George T. Stagg, William LaRue Weller, and Eagle Rare 17. I mean, some of the biggest names in whiskey have been distillers, presidents, owners of Buffalo Trace. Very historic distillery that's been around forever. Obviously, when you've been operating since 1881, you have time to fine-tune your recipes to things that you know that you like and that the masses of customers like, and Buffalo Traces capitalized on that opportunity. So that's kind of the main information, just to kind of get the conversation
hard
started.
To overstate how much each of the owners or distillers at Buffalo Trace have contributed to like bourbon overall. Taylor is basically responsible for the Bottled in Bond Act. Stag, I think, was critical in like a lot of innovations in whiskey distilling, particularly American whiskey distilling. You talked about Blanton, and like the marketing kind of aspect of things a little bit. And Elmer T. Lee was, the distiller there for a very long time. Again, like very influential, obviously. And then even Harlan is still doing some interesting and cool things. So yeah, the contributions overall by that distillery and the brands that they've purchased over the years is like unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, I was gonna say the foresight that Buffalo Trace had from the get go is just absolutely incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
going all the way back to Albert Blanton, creating Blantons just by hosting parties and picking a single barrel to serve at that party. Before single barrel was known as a thing is crazy. The fact that they purchased the Weller line, the Pappy line before, nobody really knew what it was at that time. And and up until probably 5 years after they purchased it, it's still kind of just sat on the shelves, and we've talked about that before. But just with everything, I mean, building more rick houses, increasing production, like this was all done before bourbon really hit its stride, where we're at right now. So
Yep.
just amazing foresight into the future and preparation on their part.
Yeah, because they were, if not the largest distillery in the world before their expansion, they were probably in the top 3. I think after their expansion, they're absolutely the largest distillery in the world. I'm pretty sure.
And yet still,
which is crazy.
You
to
can't
think
buy any
about.
of their bourbons on the shelf.
Right.
Yeah, it's, I mean, and just like I said, the names that have gone through there, and I think it was Albert Blanton. If I remember my history stuff that I was reading correct, was like he wanted to work at the distillery, and the distillery told him no, they weren't hiring. No, that was Elmer. Was it Elmer or Blanton? One of them. The distillery said they weren't hiring, and he still showed up to start work, even though they didn't hire him. And all of a sudden, he became one of the bigger names and one of the most storied distilleries in the U.S. So, I mean, they fell into some lucky times or some lucky people, but they have go back and have a big history. And the biggest thing is just when you have multiple generations of people working at your place and perfecting your product, it's only going to create good things. Now, we talk a lot about the taters because Buffalo Trace is by far and away the most sought after whiskeys in stores. It's the hype's a little strong, but the reason why there's hype around it is because you have to have a good product to start with hype. On top of it, if you look through their lineage, they've had like some of their most influential people have also been marketers. They've not only figured out how to produce good whiskey, but produce good marketing around it to create buzz and keep it relevant.
Yep.
Yeah. Couldn't have done a better job.
I mean, just the smallest thing is when whiskey wasn't a thing anymore in the 80s, all of a sudden they released something called a single barrel bourbon, which no one had heard of, put it in a fancy looking bottle with a cool topper on it, and now all of a sudden you have people starting to look at whiskey, and not too long after, whiskey becomes relevant in the U.S. again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and before, I think originally when Blanton's was released, it was not in the fancy bottle and wasn't, anything to speak of. A lot of bars actually use it as rail whiskey, and the distillery, knew that they had to change something in order to generate some kind of hype, and that's when they went to the bottle with the horse topper, because it's unique, it's easily identifiable, and it has a premium look to it, and instantly elevated its status, even though I don't think the whiskey really changed. But yeah, I mean, it's like Dan said, it's the oldest continually operating distillery in America. So they've had a long time to perfect their recipes, and it shows. It's unbelievably good whiskey. I think we hate on it quite a bit, but not because it's bad, but because the demand is a little overhyped. So I think we'll try and keep this a positive episode about Buffalo Trace, and note all the good things about it.
Yeah, I mean,
one of which I think is. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's really hard to hate on them. Like we do kind of sometimes put them down, but yeah, it's hard to hate on this distillery, because everything they do make is, pretty good.
Yeah, it's okay to hate when you're punching up.
Yeah.
Well, and everyone hates the big guy too. Like, right when the Patriots started off winning, everyone was a big fan of the Patriots and Tom Brady. And everyone's like, "All right, we're sick of this.
Mhm.
Let's get a new dynasty." And everyone hates the people that are at the top for a long time.
I think the hate kind of comes from, and the annoyance kind of comes from, is a lot of people look at Buffalo Trace as like God distillery, right? Like, if it's not from Buffalo Trace, I don't want it, or it's not, it's not good enough for me if it's not from Buffalo Trace. And instead of finding other whiskeys that you might like, people are just so set on finding something from Buffalo Trace and kind of just put their blinders on when it comes to, any other distillery or whiskey. And it's mostly people who really aren't super into bourbon. So there's probably not a lot of listeners like that on this podcast, but it's people that are like hoarding all these products for absolutely no reason, because we know how much they've ramped up production, and we know in 5 or 10 years most of their products are probably going to be sitting on the shelf. Not like the Antique Collection or the Van Winkle line, but guarantee you'll be able to walk in and find Buffalo Trace, Taylor Small Batch, Eagle Rare, maybe, definitely some Weller
Reserve
stuff. Yeah. So it's only a matter of time, and these are products that are being mass produced now, and once they catch up with aging, all these people with closets full of Weller Special Reserve are going to look like fools.
Yeah, and the one thing I think to note about Buffalo Trace as a brand is that they've kept their prices relatively low and stable, even through this like inflationary time. I think we've talked about this quite a bit. If they do raise their prices, they're looking at a massive increase in supply in a few years, and they won't be able to justify those prices anymore. So I think they're making a great decision in the present to be able to properly price their products once they do get that huge supply surge. Because it's hard to find them at MSRP, but when you do, you're talking about most of their line is below $50 for a lot of the stuff. I mean, $80 for everything, basically.
Yeah.
But like a lot of the staples are like $20-$30, for like the base products, which is, pretty remarkable for the quality of the whiskey.
Yeah. And one thing, I mean, we talked a lot about it, like paying paying most of the ridiculous secondary market prices for it isn't fun. But at the same point, like, don't get lost on the fact of when we all started off, when you were searching and you finally had a chance to buy a sought after bottle of Buffalo Trace, be it a Blanton's, be it a Taylor, be it an Eagle, or whatever, for a reasonable price, like, that made your day for a while.
Yeah,
you were happy. I mean, now that we've been in the industry, we've been doing this for a while. So I mean, we all have these things. We're not trying to search it out. But when you're young and getting into, or not young, but when you're getting into bourbon, to be able to eventually stumble across one of these things, it is a joy and fun thing to bring home, that you actually found something. You have something that's fun. It gives you a good feeling. But
yeah, I can see it in people. There's definitely a rush that they get when they are able to find, a bottle like that. But yeah, I mean, it's obvious that's why they're not raising their prices, because they know in a couple of years they're going to have so much whiskey, and if they raise their prices now, they're going to be just sitting on stuff. So, I think that's a clear tell that in 5 or 10 years they know they're going to have a lot of whiskey available.
Well, and I think that helps too with marketing and sales, because like over the last 10 years, obviously there's been a massive influx of types of whiskey and bourbon on the shelf, and a lot of it's coming out at very, very high price points.
Yeah.
And when this stuff is on the shelf, Jake, maybe you can speak to it. I mean, there's always going to be new people getting into bourbon and whiskey all the time, but even when that stuff's available on the shelf, do you think a $40 bottle of a Buffalo Trace product is going to sell way quicker than a $70 bottle of a product that's been out for 15 years that not a lot of people know of? I mean, what do you think will sell
absolutely.
better?
I think as soon as like all these big six distilleries kind of catch up, and not just them, but just probably the top like 5-10% of distilleries out there, which is a lot because there's a ton of distilleries. We're going to start to see a lot of small guys go out of business because the market right now, the prices are just driving up like crazy. We're seeing 4-year whiskey being sold for $80-$100. And as soon as these guys are able to catch up, like, why would you walk in here and buy a bottle of some small craft distillery that's 3 times the price and half the age of a Weller Special Reserve or Eagle Rare 10-year single barrel for $40? How can you pass that up?
Yeah, or we'll see another round of consolidation of brands where these distilleries will buy up, smaller crafts and roll them into their offerings or something.
Yeah, there will be.
That's what we saw a lot of in the 80s and 90s. And we're probably due for another round of that after all these distilleries catch up, like you said.
Yeah, so I mean, now like more than ever, it's so important to really perfect what you're doing if you're distilling and really hone in on something that kind of sets you apart. Whiskey Acres, perfect example. There's not many other distilleries out there that are growing their own grains and producing the same mash bill with different corns. And it's super cool to be able to taste what the corn can do to the whiskey. And so I think that's something that, they have something going for them that's going to always draw people in. But if you're just, another distiller out there buying MGP barrels, you probably need to bring in like a master blender to really set yourself apart. And at that point, the price of the bottles just aren't going to make sense.
Yeah.
Right. And your competition there is pretty stiff.
Oh yeah.
As far as blending goes.
Right.
So.
That's what I kind of mean is you really need you need everything. You need a really cool bottle. You need really good marketing. You need really good whiskey. Like good whiskey is not just going to cut it. Like marketing and, cool looking bottles.
Yeah.
You need everything to go your way in order to succeed and stand out right now where we are at with American whiskey. But I would.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. No, keep on your thoughts.
I was going to kind of just change up a little bit and, just say I do feel like it's really, really impressive how they're able to come out with 30 or so different brands just off of 3 mash bills. That's something I've always kind of thought Buffalo Trace had going for them. On the side of having really great whiskey is, to be able to say, all right, this barrel is going to be on the 6th floor of this warehouse. It's probably going to taste like Eagle Rare and we should let that go for 10 years or, whatever. That is just super cool. And that's a really good example when you're explaining to somebody, who's just getting into bourbon. I always use Buffalo Trace as an example, just because, it's cool to show people like where it's being aged, how long it's being aged, the char, whatever, can make the same exact starting product taste completely different once it's bottled.
Right.
Yeah.
And like
it's
to hammer that home, there's like the main distinguishing factors are warehouse location and age for Buffalo Trace products, which is, it is pretty incredible when you think of like trying the different products within the same mash bill. Like you said, like they can taste drastically different. But I think there are some like key notes that carry through, which is kind of cool to pick those out and compare contrast, between 2 labels that are from the same mash bill.
Right.
Yeah, so a perfect example that my old neighbor, she likes whiskey a little bit, but isn't a big whiskey person. She's not going out and drinking different whiskeys, and she was trying to learn some stuff, and we were drinking a few one night. And just as an example, someone that doesn't drink a ton of whiskey, we tried a couple things. I poured a Weller 12, which she's like, "Oh, this is really good. This is probably the favorite one I've ever had." And then after that, I poured Pappy 12. Which same age, basically same mash bill. She's like, how does, I was explaining that to her beforehand. She could sip. She's like, how does this taste so much better? And she didn't really know what a Pappy was. And she's like, why does this taste so much better when it's the same? And I'm like, aging. Where it's at in a warehouse. Like, that's all the difference
and
is
selected
between the two.
barrels.
Yeah.
Premium
Yep.
selected barrels and put aside for a better blend, and you can charge more even though it's the exact same thing.
And having a staff that can easily decipher, hey, this is going to be Weller 12, this is going to be Pappy 12.
Yeah, I mean the tasting panel must be very impressive from Buffalo Trace. I know they have about this is probably has gone up, but I know when I was there a couple years ago, they said they had about 30 people that taste everything and approve it for if it's going to be Pappy, if it's going to be Weller, or where it's going to go into the bottle, which is just kind of amazing that they get all these people with the palates all on the same page and put that much trust in them.
Yeah,
I think when we were there last year, my thought was I thought they said something around close to 40 people, so I think that's probably very similar. And they taste everything. Was it 40 proof? They taste everything at.
I think so.
They cut it down to 40 proof to. Yeah, I think they said it was 40 proof. They cut it down to taste everything, and at 40 proof, they decided.
Wow.
And it's pretty spectacular. They just like. How big of a dream job is that? Just to every day work at Buffalo Trace, taste their whiskey, decide if this is a Pappy line, if this is a Weller line, if this is
that's a
Eagle,
tough gig.
Yeah. I'm sure there's not a waiting list of people that want to do that for a job. I'm pretty sure it's not highly sought after. I might do an application for it.
Yeah,
they're
hiring right now.
It's not like Jake gets to do that often either. So.
Yeah,
not at that level, but yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing I think to note about the distillery is that they clearly do have a strong, at least concept of quality control. I think a couple years ago, infamously, they did not even bottle the George T. Stag in the antique collection because they felt it wasn't up to par. We don't know if they just dumped it or if they put it into other things, but they could have easily just bottled that and sent out a mediocre batch of George T. Stag, but chose not to. So one, I think that speaks to a level of quality control that's pretty impressive, and two, that they have enough shit behind that to back it up. So even one whole batch of an antique collection isn't going to hurt them so bad that they feel like they have to put that out in order to make the money back, which is kind of crazy to think about.
And it's got to be tough too, because they could have put that out and not have been the way they wanted it to be, and the overwhelming it would still sell out in a heartbeat, and the overwhelming majority would still blow the hell out of Buffalo Trace for putting it out. But you would have those critics that are bigger names in the industry saying, hey, this isn't as good as what it has been. What's going on here at Buffalo Trace? And instead of having that controversy, they're like, you know what? Let's just avoid it. We have enough. Not having a release of this year is going to kill us. And the thing is, they probably still took flack from that because of so many people don't care. They just want that bottle.
Oh yeah.
Of George Stagg. So good on them for sticking to the rest, not resting on their laurels. And
while they probably would still have some critics saying it's not as good as previous batches, they would still have a lot of people that would say, "Oh, this is the best thing ever," just because they know they're drinking George T. Stagg.
Yeah.
So,
but I think that goes back to they've had they've had well over 100 years of knowing how to run a distillery and knowing what does well and how to make sure the distillery looks the best. They're a National Historic Landmark at the distillery there. It's kind of everything's got to be for the brand for them. And if it's not going to meet brand standards, then they're big enough, they're well known enough that they can survive that without any problems. And they're more concerned about how they're perceived and how their stuff tastes versus just giving something for people to buy. And that's impressive, especially these days when you're especially when you're seeing other distilleries that have special releases that they put out every year that are continually getting criticized more and more and more, and yet they still keep putting them out. And some of them keep raising their prices. High West and your Midwinter's Night Dram.
Yeah.
Or even Remus, Repeal Reserve.
Oh, yeah.
It's getting more expensive, and it hasn't. I still think 5 is by far and away one of my top 5 whiskeys, and I haven't tried 7, but I wasn't overly sold on 6. So they're doing that, and they're keeping their prices manageable. I mean, it's
and
insane.
seemingly putting out more of that stuff.
Yeah.
Is the Remus 6 sat on shelves for over a year, I think.
Yeah, I've still seen Remus 6 on shelves.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about the mash bills a little bit. Obviously, these are all proprietary, so we don't know exactly what's in them.
It's a low rye and high rye. That's all we know. There's reports on rough percentages, but it's the way they do it is the master distiller knows the mash bill. I'm sure there's a big NDA that they're signing with massive fines if they leak it, and those are what's reported as the only people that know what is actually in each mash bill.
Yeah. So mash bill 1 is your Eagle Rare, Stag, Taylor, Benchmark, Buffalo Trace, and Old Carter. That's the lower rye mash bill. This is even though I'm a big fan of rye, this is actually my favorite of the Buffalo Trace mash bills. I'm drinking the Eagle Rare today. It's actually the Gold Eagle store pick from earlier this year. But there's a pretty strong kind of fruit note in mash bill 1. A lot of people categorize it as cherry. I actually get a lot of like artificial grape. It reminds me of Big League Chew a lot.
Yeah, that's what I've always said with that one is Big League Chew.
Even the smell is very like that like grape candy kind of smell. So yeah, it's super interesting. It's got, the normal other bourbon flavors. But other than the specific barrel proof versions of those labels, they're all around 90 or 94 proof. Taylor's 100 because it's bottled in bond. But yeah, I mean, even for lower proof, the flavor profiles are good on almost all the base products in mash bill 1. I know Dan's favorite is mash bill 2, so I'll let you talk about that one.
It's not necessarily my favorite. I'm more of I'd say my favorite is the weeded line.
Oh yeah, you would.
Jesus. Like, I love how you say that, but yeah, we're doing a birthday event with you at Gold Eagle and doing blind weeded tasting.
It's like, not for me.
I know, but we're still doing it. Like, it's like, I love how you're like, well, I don't like weeded, but I want to do this and I want to do this. And oh, this whiskey's really good. Oh, I really love this Whiskey Acres barrel pick. All fucking weeded, by the way. Just a hypocrite you are. No, I the mash bill 2 I just had because that was my barrel that I got from Tom and Antioch Barrels. It was a mash bill 2. Obviously, that's probably the more sought after one because that is the Blanton's barrel. Rock Hill Farms,
Elmer,
Hancock's, which is okay, but I would almost probably say I enjoy mash bill 1 more than I enjoy mash bill 2. But I just liked having the mash bill 2 barrel, and Jake, when he gets some Rock Hill Farms in, is going to give me a chance to buy a Rock Hill Farm so I can have the entire collection in that barrel, which is really nice of him.
I thought you don't like Rock Hill, though.
I wasn't big on it, but I want they're Pokemon, man. You got to catch them all.
It's so bland. It is like a.
I know, but it's a collection thing.
I know.
God. But no, obviously Blanton's comes out of this. So that's what most people are going to go to. The one thing that I still can never find, and Jake, I don't know if I've seen it everywhere in liquor stores. Buffalo Trace also sells their white dog.
Yeah, we have it.
And you can buy their white dog and age it. But I've always seen mash bill 1, the weeded mash bill, and the rye mash bill. I have never seen white dog of mash bill 2, and I constantly look for it.
I don't think I have.
I
don't think I've ever seen. I don't know. I would assume considering they have the other 3, but maybe they don't for some reason. I don't know. I don't understand. I would love to get white dog because I do have a barrel I'd like to age it in, and then include that like a miniature barrel I'd like to age that in, and then include it in my Buffalo Trace mash bill 2 display. But I've never seen that.
I'm looking right now at the distributor's site to see if they have any.
But in terms of flavor from mash bill 2, you don't get I feel you get away from that grape flavor that I normally get out of Mash Bill 1. I feel that's more muted. It always seems like Mash Bill 2 has had a little bit more of the barrel notes in it, so I always get a little bit more vanilla that sneaks out of Mash Bill 2.
Yep.
I haven't drank straight Ancient Age in over a year, which I have a bottle I should try and see. That's probably the best one to get description out of because that's the least aged, so you're not going to get the barrel notes. You're going to get more of the spirit. I should have probably grabbed that, but since the Weeded Mash Bill is my favorite, I'm going to drink that today. So,
like you said, vanilla is like a huge note in Mash Bill 2. Depending on which bottle of Blanton's you get, it can be like a total vanilla bomb, or it can be, a bit more muted. Elmer T. Lee is also very vanilla forward, and a little bit more of the oak notes because it's a bit older. But it's much more. It's not nearly as fruit forward as Mash Bill 1 is.
Yeah. I mean, the Weeded Mash Bill, did you find anything,
No,
Jake?
they didn't have any White Dog. I mean, those kind of come and go with availability, so I'll just have to keep my eyes open.
Right. But I've every time I go into a store, like you always see the White Dogs on the shelf, and I will never see Mash Bill 2. The Weller line. So, like, I know Jake. Well, I'm guessing that there's probably gonna be some Weller in the Weeded blind tasting today. Not for sure, but I'm guessing there's a chance that'll be in there.
I have no idea what I'm pouring. As soon as we get off this podcast, that is my first task of the day.
It's the Weller line is unique because it doesn't have like a in-depth flavor profile. It's not going to take you on too much of a journey. It's just very soft. It's very smooth. It's very subtle and very drinkable. And I think, like Jake, I know you said you don't put it a lot in blind tastings if you're trying to shit on Buffalo Trace for a day because it always does
I'll be honest, like it does do well in blind tastings because of how soft it is. It's just
it's so difficult to put it up against things just because it's like
whatever you put it up against,
anyone that's like
people are going to say the other thing is just a little more harsh. Yeah,
and it's gonna,
exactly.
Yeah. And every comment is always, "Oh my god, it's so smooth."
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and even I'm drinking a full proof at. I had a little pre-pour at 10. I'm drinking full proof whiskey, which is 114 for them. Yeah, 114 proof on a full proof, and you could blind this against a lot of like 90 proof whiskeys, and I guarantee you people would think that the full proof is lower proof point than some of those 20 proof points below. So think about throwing that in there, Jake, because now I said that, so feel free to try and make fun of me tonight.
We'll see.
I'll expect that out of you. I would expect nothing less out of you now at this point because I said that. But no, it's hard. I mean, a lot of weeded whiskeys are soft and easy drinkers, but I think that's one of the reasons why people gravitate towards Weller, especially newer people into whiskey, is because it is just such a easy drinker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd like to know what the percentage of wheat is, because if you go too high with the wheat, it doesn't produce that effect.
It's so got to be low.
Some super middle ground that's like, gives you that like pristine smoothness.
Yeah, I would have to guess it's super low because once you get above a certain point, you just start to get more spice and more graininess that comes through. But yeah, I would guess like maybe 5 to 10%, like that low.
Yeah.
Yeah. Besides the weeded, it's the rye mash bill,
which I take back what I said earlier. The rye is my actual favorite.
Such a waffler. But yeah, I mean, you have your Sazerac, you have your Thomas Handy, and you have your Van Winkle rye.
Yeah, and these
your Taylor rye. Taylor rye.
Like I'd say pretty comfortably that these are probably Kentucky rye mash bills, where it's like 51% rye.
Yeah.
They're all fairly sweet. They don't have that like dill note at all. They don't have much of the rye spice. There's a little bit of the like rye that comes through, but it's mostly bourbon-y kind of flavors.
Yeah, I'd be curious on like where they get their rye from and more details about the rye, because rumors are, we don't know the exact mash bills, but going back to like mash bill 1 and 2, rumors are I think that they're like 10% and 12% rye on those, like just super small, even though they call it high rye, like it's still
Barely
pretty low
even,
rye.
yeah.
But there, you know, you do get a decent amount of spice, I think, on all Buffalo Trace products. And then even the rye whiskeys aren't like spice bombs, though. They're kind of just more well-rounded whiskeys, and a lot of times in like blinds, people think they're bourbons.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I remember one of my biggest mistakes in my life was when I thought Eagle Rare was a rye in a blind tasting.
Yeah, see, I mean,
and I convinced the entire table that I was right.
Yeah, you were hard on that. You were really hard on
but you
that.
do get some decent spice notes out of all these Buffalo Trace products, even though they are supposedly like very low rye.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was 2 years ago we tried the Van Winkle rye.
That was last year.
Was it last year? And
last
it was
Consume.
That was like one of the most wild ryes I've ever tried. It tasted like blueberry cobbler, which is like, I've never had a rye taste like that ever again. So Jake, if you ever get one of those, you know.
I have had the Van Winkle rye. This was a really, really old bottle. And yeah, I mean, it is, I'd have to say it's probably the best rye I've ever had. I mean, this was probably like a 2010 bottle. I mean, so this is pre, Buffalo Trace, but yeah.
I mean, and it's probably the oldest rye I've ever had at 13 years, you know, like most
American
ryes
rye
don't go beyond like 7 or 8. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've had the Handy, I've had the Sazerac 18, and I've had the Van Winkle rye. Like I've never had them side by side, and it's been over 3 years since I've had the Sazerac rye 18 year. That one still really sits out in my head as something really special, but it's been 3 years. It's hard to tell. It's not something that you see very often and get a chance to have very often, so it's hard to constantly say it. But it mentally, that's been my second favorite whiskey I've ever had. I think I've said it a few times, but
even regular Sazerac rye is excellent.
But and the funny thing is too is when I tried the Taylor rye, I was not a fan of the Taylor rye. And then we did that with Roberto at his house that one night.
I love the Taylor rye.
We had it lose.
I don't know what it is. I just love it.
We had it lose in a blind. I forgot what it went up against, but
I was like one of
weren't you
a
there?
Couple people that voted for it.
Yeah, what was it up against?
That was in the Heaven Hill one, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. Oh, it lost to Rittenhouse rye.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I voted for Rittenhouse over it. So yeah, because I did hit all Heaven Hill and that tasted.
All right, good.
I was proud of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that good that he hit all Heaven Hill?
Because he loves Heaven. He loves Heaven Hill. All he does is talk about Heaven Hill. So
Heaven Hill.
That would be bad if he picked all the Buffalo Trace. You might have to rethink everything.
That would have been really embarrassing.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I guess overall, like, a lot of people will hate on Buffalo Trace, and they don't hate Buffalo Trace because of what they're producing. They hate on Buffalo Trace because the people that are trying to constantly find their products. I think that's the biggest thing.
I mean, like
Buffalo Trace.
There's nothing bad to say about their products. They're all good. They're all, extremely well crafted, and like the attention to the recipes is like super evident. Like you don't exist this long without making good product. So yeah, if somebody's shitting on them, it's not because of their products, it's because they are who they are.
Sometimes it's because of their products, like Taylor Small Batch being overrated, but
It's overrated. Is it bad?
Well,
No.
right.
Well,
but it's
yeah,
overrated.
that's the argument, right?
It's good whiskey, but
is that
there's half price bottles that are better and available.
Yeah.
right.
Yep. All right. Well, I don't think we have too much more to say about the good old Buffalo Trace. We'll do a lesser distillery next week in our big 6 distilleries. Are we doing Heaven Hill? Can we show on Heaven Hill next week? Is that what we're doing?
What are we doing next week? Jim Beam is next
Ooh,
week.
nice.
No.
Yeah, which
All
I know
right.
all of us are big fans of Jim Beam, so that'll be a fun one to do.
Well, Jake, since you're in your store, if people don't want to go to your store, they can buy stuff online as well. But where can they find Gold Eagle products?
GoldEagleWine.com. Also download our app on the Apple App Store or Google Play Store. Shop online for in-store pickup, local delivery, and soon shipping. And then follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram is at Gold Eagle Wine. Facebook is at Gold Eagle Spirits. Stay up to date with weekly and daily deliveries and see what is going on at the Eagle. Come see my man Drew behind me
And make
at
sure
the
you
bar.
check out
Drew, wave. Special
Drew.
guest appearance.
Drew.
We got to wait. And guess what? He's getting paid again
He
to be on the
is,
podcast.
yeah.
Jesus Christ, Jake, that's twice.
Yeah.
Stop paying to be on our podcast.
And also check out the Whiskey Acres Barrel Pick that just
Ooh,
released last week.
It went very well.
It went very well.
A lot of
We
product.
sold
moved.
32 bottles
Yeah.
of the
Like-
barrel pick, 60 bottles total. It was a big hit.
Despite me being the one presenting, like that's the biggest thing. Is like that's how well the product speaks because I had to speak and the product.
I thought you
product
did
did
pretty
well,
good.
so.
I thought you did a pretty good job. So no,
Debatable.
I thought
Mediocre
you did
at best.
good.
So that's all that matters.
I'll give you props.
But
Yeah, it's a super
Jake,
unique bottle, so make sure you check it out.
Yeah,
You got it at the bar to try?
we do. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
give it a try. Very unique for Whiskey Acres.
Mhm.
The third in the series?
third
finished
cast
series?
finish we've ever done
Yeah,
that we've released.
and it's a toasted oak that's 2 years old, so I don't think you can really get that anywhere else.
No.
Yeah, a 2.5 years in toasted oak.
Yeah,
It's
right.
almost 8 years in oak, 2.5 years in, or 2 years, almost 2.75 years in toasted oak.
Yeah, pretty wild, and definitely worth a try. So podcast, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. You can watch us on Spotify and YouTube. Follow us at Bourbon Matters, and we'll see you next week.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.